But all these hypotheses assume that the brain is capable of producing these elaborate experiences, which most people say is the most detailed and vivid experience of their lives, at a time when the brain is demonstrably impaired, if not offline entirely. And if we did find a physiological phenomenon that was associated with near-death experiences, that wouldn't explain how people were able to see things accurately from outside their bodies, or how they could encounter people who were dead and no one knew they were dead yet. So I don't think those physiological explanations can really explain anything. We are normally taught in school that the brain creates our thoughts and our feelings and our perceptions. A popular way of saying this is, as they say, that the mind is what the brain does. And if you believe that, then there's no way you can have a near-death experience or terminal lucidity. But there's been another thought that's been going on for thousands of years that says the brain doesn't create thoughts. The mind is somewhere else, I don't know where. And what the brain does is receive these thoughts and filter them and let in to your consciousness only those thoughts that are important to survival. This is not surprising because all our sense organs do this. Our eyes don't let in all the light that's available, just a small section of the electromagnetic spectrum that's relevant to our survival. So we don't see light colors that other animals do, infrared, ultraviolet, because they're not important to us. So the brain restricts what we see to what is necessary for physical survival. And the idea is that the brain does this with thoughts as well. It only lets in those thoughts that are important to surviving, finding food, finding shelter, finding a mate, avoiding predators. And it filters out all those things that are not important to survival, like seeing deceased loved ones or communicating with deities. Those aren't important to surviving in the physical world.
Would even be confusing to see them all the time, I guess.
Right. And this has been, Hippocrates talked about this 2,000 years ago. He said, the brain is the interpreter of the mind. And there's been a secondary thread of thought throughout science for the last 2,000 years looking at this. And in the last decade or so, there's been a lot of research into what parts of the brain are involved in this filtering process. And there's been some progress made along these lines. We also see, for example, in psychedelic drugs, which people have maybe spiritually transformative experiences under psychedelic drugs. We used to think that these drugs work by making people hallucinate, by stimulating the brain so it hallucinates. And what we found in the last 20 years or so is that when people take these drugs and start having near-death or near-death-like experiences, spiritually transformative experiences, their brain activity actually decreases and becomes less coordinated. So again, it's like the brain is shutting down, letting this consciousness come in. And that may be what's happening in terminal lucidity as well.
Yeah.
That as the brain deteriorates near death, it lets all sorts of things in that it normally would filter out.
So it's like the brain has to, as it were, get out of the way in order for people to have these experiences, to get access to what is actually there on the other side of the veil, as it were.
Right.
Yeah, and this thing you said about psychedelics and that the brain actually shows less activity when people take those, must have been a real blow to the materialists.
Well, they're desperately
that was 10 years ago or something like that?
Yeah. There's been several studies of that over the past 10, 15 years, and they're desperately trying to find some way of getting around that, looking at various more subtle measures of brain activity. Maybe there's something else going on we aren't aware of. But people have used the metaphor of looking up at the sky during the day and you don't see any stars because the sun is so bright it blocks them out. It's only at night when the sun goes down that you see the stars. Not that the stars weren't there, they just were blocked. And that's the way the brain filters out thoughts for us. Only when the brain's out of the way can you see these other things.
What will it take for society to come around and accept that there is something more to life and to death than what we can measure with physical instruments?
Well, that's a great question, Anders. I've spent my career looking at scientific evidence And that's ultimately not what convinces people. What convinces people is personal experience, usually. So I think the more we can do towards helping people have these experiences, whether it's by meditation or by other spiritual practices, the more we're going to find the whole consciousness of the society starting to change. And certainly publicizing these more in the popular media has helped a great deal in opening up people's minds to these things.